I think certainly an interesting statement by the First Minister. I think everybody expected that indeed most of the restrictions would go. After all, having suffered at the beginning of July a worse peak of cases than Scotland experienced in January, the fact that cases are now running around roughly a third of that level, still somewhat higher than they were in the spring of this year. But it's very clear that in Scotland, as in the rest of the UK, the link between cases and serious ill health, let alone death, has largely been very heavily weakened. That said, there are still some differences from England, of which the most obvious will be is that the legal requirement for people to wear face masks in indoor settings will remain as they are at present. So whereas in England now, if you wish, you can go into a shop or go onto public transport without wearing a face mask, that will remain illegal north of the border. And the First Minister has made it pretty clear that she expects that to remain the position for quite some while. Second obvious difference is that there is no call back for people to go back into the office. If employers do wish people to go back into the office, that's now fine. But the First Minister has indicated that basically the recommendation is still to work at home if you can, and indeed is saying that she thinks that employers should be thinking about hybrid working, sometimes in the office, sometimes at home for quite some considerable time, if not indeed permanently. And third obvious difference is that while the legal regulations on social distancing are going, guidance will still be in place. And there is clearly an expectation or a hope by the First Minister that hospitality settings will still be somewhat more separated out, and that indeed certainly a very strong emphasis on ventilation. Just one other point to note, which perhaps is something will be of equal interest to viewers south of the border, and that is the First Minister has been pressing the JCVI, as the Chief Medical Officer in Scotland, for the mass vaccination of teenagers. Well, she hinted today that she's hoping the JCVI are going to move on that, and that if they do, Scotland will be vaccinating its teenagers sooner rather than later. You have to bear in mind that whereas Boris Johnson released basically most of the restrictions in England just as schools were breaking up, in Scotland the schools will start going back next week. The school holidays come to an end. And to that extent, at least, Nicola Sturgeon is making a bit of a bigger risk in that the schools are going to reopen at a time when most, though not all, the restrictions are finally being ended.